Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku inherited the power of the Black Lanterns. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The world was a symphony of destruction, and Izuku Midoriya was frozen at its epicenter. Dust, thick and choking, hung in the air of the USJ's Central Plaza, a gritty curtain that tasted of concrete and iron. The sound was a cacophony of monstrous roars, the wet, sickening impacts of flesh against flesh, and the high-pitched, childish glee of the man with hands plastered all over his body. But for Izuku, all sound had narrowed to a single, horrifying percussion, the brutal, rhythmic smashing of his teacher's head against the unforgiving stone floor. Thump. 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 Shoyuta Aizawa, the indomitable Eraserhead, was being broken. The colossal creature, the Nomu as Tamura Shigaraki had called it, held him like a child's discarded doll. One monstrous, bird-like hand gripped Aizawa's torso, the other pinned his head, and with systematic, terrifying force, it drove his skull into the ground again and again. The cracking of bone was a sound that would be etched into Izuku's nightmares for eternity. He had tried. Gods, he had tried. He had seen the Nomu break Aizawa's arms as if they were dry twigs. He had watched as his teacher, even with his quirk erased and his body shattered, managed to use his quirk one last time to save Tsuyu. That act of pure, selfless heroism had been the spark. Izuku, along with Tsuyu and Mineta, had been hidden in the water, but he couldn't stay there. He had to do something. But what could he do? His brief, desperate lunge had been useless. The Nomu hadn't even registered him as a threat. It had simply turned, its blank, unfeeling eyes staring into a space beyond him, and continued its grisly work. Now Aizawa lay still. His limbs were bent at angles that nature never intended. A pool of crimson, darker than any blood Izuku had ever seen, was spreading from beneath his head, staining the gray stones of the plaza. His goggles were shattered, and one eye was swollen into a mess of purple and black. He wasn't moving. He wasn't breathing. He's dead, a small, whimpering voice said beside him. Mineta, his face a mask of tears and terror. No, Tsuyu whispered, her voice trembling, but her pragmatic nature forcing the words out. He's, ribbit, not moving. The words didn't register as separate statements to Izuku. They fused into a single, declarative truth that slammed into his chest with the force of a physical blow. He's dead. Izuku's own body was a prison. His legs, which he'd been training to withstand the awesome power of One for All, felt like they were filled with lead. His lungs, which he needed to draw breath to shout, to scream, to call for help, were seized in a vice of pure, undiluted terror. One for All, the legacy of heroes, the symbol of hope, felt a million miles away. It was a sun on the other side of the galaxy, and he was lost in the cold, empty void between. I'm useless. A quirkless weakling who stumbled into a power he can't control. And a hero is dead because of it. Because I wasn't strong enough. Because I wasn't fast enough. Because I wasn't here. His gaze drifted to Shigaraki, who was scratching his neck with a furious, agitated energy. The villain's thin frame was practically vibrating with excitement. Wow, he's amazing, isn't he, Nomu? Shigaraki rasped, his voice a dry, grating sound. The anti-symbol of peace. He broke the pro-hero without even trying. This is great. It's like a mid-boss that's way too overpowered. Now, where's the final boss? He's supposed to be here. The game guide said he would be here. Shigaraki's head tilted, his red eyes peering through the gaps in the hand on his face, and they landed on the three frozen students. His posture changed, a predator spotting wounded prey. Oh, right. We still have these NPCs to clear out. Maybe if I start killing kids, All Might will show up faster. That's usually a good trigger for the main event. He started to walk towards them, his footsteps slow, deliberate, each one a nail in the coffin of Izuku's hope. And then, the despair in Izuku's heart did something strange. It curdled. The overwhelming sadness, the self-loathing, the paralyzing fear, it began to burn. It was a cold fire, an agonizing pressure building behind his eyes and in the hollow of his chest. It isn't fair. The thought was a whisper, but it had the weight of a dying star. Heroes aren't supposed to die like this. He was protecting us. He was trying to save everyone. It's not right. It's not final. It can't be. The grief twisted into something new, something sharper and more profound. It was a rage, but not the explosive fury of Bakugo. It was a deep, philosophical, and absolute rejection of the event that had just occurred. It was a denial of the fundamental laws of the universe. It was the desperate, primal wish of a child who had seen something beautiful be irrevocably broken and wanted, with every fiber of his being, to simply undo it. He didn't want to fight Shigaraki. He didn't want to defeat the Nomu. At that moment, his will wasn't focused on victory. It was focused on reversing the ultimate defeat, bring him back. The wish was not a thought. It was not a prayer. It was a silent, psychic scream of pure, concentrated emotional agony. It tore out from his very soul, a singularity of loss and rage directed at the cold, impartial fact of death itself. He felt something inside him break, a fundamental part of his spirit snapping under the strain of his own emotion. And across the infinite, churning realities of the emotional spectrum, a beacon was lit. For millennia it had lain dormant, a shard of cosmic negativity embedded deep within the planet's crust, shielded from the vibrancy of life and the chaotic energies of quirks. It was a fragment of a dead god, a remnant of a universal apocalypse, waiting. It fed on nothingness, on the heat-death of hope, on the vacuum left by loss. It had slumbered, deaf to the petty griefs and everyday sorrows of a world teeming with life. But this was different. This was not the quiet sadness of a funeral, or the sharp pain of a sudden loss. This was a will, a powerful, nascent will, actively raging against the concept of an ending. It was a nexus of emotion so pure in its death-focused despair that it resonated with the shard's own fundamental nature. It was a call. A summons. An answer. High above the shattered dome of the unforeseen simulation joint, the air rippled. For a microsecond, the sky itself seemed to glitch, the afternoon light bending around a point of impossible blackness. A thin, sharp whistle cut through the air, unheard by anyone except on a primal, instinctual level. Shigaraki paused, his head cocking to the side. What was that? Even the Noma seemed to hesitate, its empty gaze turning towards the broken glass ceiling. A streak of absolute darkness, no bigger than a fist, tore through the sky. It wasn't on fire like a meteor, it absorbed the light around it, leaving a trail of shimmering, distorted air in its wake. It screamed downwards, aimed not for the villains, not for the students, but for the precise epicenter of Izuku Midoriya's psychic outburst. Crack boom! The object slammed into the stone plaza less than 5 feet from Izuku, sending a spiderweb of cracks radiating outwards and blasting him, Tsuyu, and Mineta back with the force of the impact. They tumbled into the water, the shock saving them from the spray of stone shrapnel. The plaza fell silent. Shigaraki stared at the small, smoking crater. The Noma stood perfectly still, a silent monolith. From the water, Izuku pushed his head above the surface, gasping, his ears ringing. He looked at the impact site. In the center of the newly formed crater sat a rock. It was no bigger than a football, made of a material that looked like obsidian but seemed to drink the light, making its edges indistinct and its surface unknowable. It pulsed with a faint, inner darkness, and the air around it was unnaturally cold. As they watched, the rock began to crack, not from heat, but as if it were an egg hatching. Fine, black lines spread over its surface. With a soft, grating sound, it broke apart, crumbling into a pile of fine, dark dust. And in the center of that dust, lying perfectly pristine, was a ring. It was a simple, unadorned band of the same light-devouring black material. It bore no gemstone, no intricate carvings, except for a single, stark symbol etched into its surface. A circle, with a triangle bisected by a vertical line pointing down from its center. The symbol felt ancient, wrong, a piece of geometry that defied the cheerful, colorful world of heroes and villains. It was a symbol of finality. An emblem of the void. Shigaraki's eyes widened with a new kind of avarice. Ooh, what's this? A special event? A loot drop? He started forward, his greed overriding his caution. But before he could take a second step, the ring pulsed with a soft, internal light, and a voice echoed, not in the plaza, but inside Izuku's head. It was a voice unlike any he had ever heard. It was not male or female. It held no tone, no inflection, no emotion. It was the auditory equivalent of a black hole, a presence defined entirely by its own emptiness. Izuku Midoriya of Earth. Izuku flinched, clutching his head. The voice was cold, so cold it felt like liquid nitrogen being poured directly onto his brain. It knew his name. You rage against the finality of the end. You feel the pull of the void. The ring lifted from the dust, hovering in the air. It seemed to look at him, though it had no eyes. It was a key, recognizing its lock. Rise. The ring shot forward. It wasn't a blur of speed, it moved with a calm, inexorable purpose, like a carrion bird claiming its meal. Izuku, still half submerged in the water, tried to scramble back, a fresh wave of primal fear overriding everything else. He threw his hands up to shield his face. It was a futile gesture. The ring bypassed his defenses, slid with impossible precision onto the middle finger of his right hand, the hand that bore the scars of his untamed power, and stopped. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then came the cold. It was not the chill of the water or the bite of the wind. It was a fundamental, absolute cold, the temperature of empty space. It sank into his finger, through his knuckle, into his bone. He screamed, a raw, real sound this time, trying to pull the ring off, but it wouldn't budge. It felt like it was phasing into his very being. Thin, black lines, like frozen veins, spread from the ring, crawling over his knuckle and down the back of his hand. He could feel it, a network of chilling energy integrating with his nervous system. It felt like a violation. It felt like an infection. The ring was no longer on his finger. It was part of it. Fused. Permanent. Get it off! He shrieked, his voice cracking with panic. He thrashed in the water, trying to scrape it against the concrete edge, but it was useless. What's he doing? Shigaraki muttered, annoyed by the delay. Is it a cursed item? Nomu, finished the kid. Then we'll get the ring. The hulking beast took a step forward, its massive hand raised to obliterate Izuku. Tsuyu cried out his name, a desperate, gargled sound. Izuku saw the shadow fall over him. He saw the mountain of muscle and beak-like face descending. His mind screamed for one for all, for the crackling green energy of hope and power. He felt a flicker of it, a familiar warmth trying to ignite in his limbs. But the cold was faster. The ring, now a part of him, felt the threat to its new host. And it reacted. It didn't ask. It didn't wait for a command. A surge of energy erupted from the ring, not the vibrant, life-affirming crackle of one for all, but its perfect opposite. It was a wave of pure, silent blackness. It didn't glow. It devoured the light around it, creating a visible distortion in the air. The energy poured from his hand, forming a thick, semi-solid shield of what looked like hardened shadow. The Noma's fist, a blow that could rival All Might's, slammed into the black construct. There was no sound, no thunderous boom, no shockwave, no shattering of energy. The kinetic force of the punch was simply gone. Absorbed. Nullified. The black shield didn't even ripple. It was as if the Nomu had punched a hole in reality itself, and reality hadn't noticed. Everyone stared. Mineta stopped crying. Tsuyu's wide eyes grew wider. Shigaraki stopped scratching. The Nomu, a creature seemingly without thought, actually seemed confused. It pulled its fist back and stared at its knuckles, then at the black shield that still hovered in front of Izuku. Izuku himself was staring at his hand in numb horror. The black energy felt hungry. It felt empty. He could feel it pulling, drawing on something. Not on his stamina, not on his life force. It was drawing on the ambient despair in the plaza. On Mineta's terror. On Tsuyu's fear. On his own deep, bottomless grief for his teacher. It was feeding on the emotional death surrounding them, and in return, it was giving him a sick, hollow-feeling strength. A defensive quirk? Shigaraki breathed, his voice a mix of frustration and utter fascination. It awakened under stress? No, that's not a quirk. That was something else. A rare drop, a legendary item. His obsession was reaching a fever pitch. He had to have it. He had to understand it, but he had run out of time. A sound boomed from the entrance of the USJ, a sound of such profound power and authority that it shattered the tense silence. The main doors were blown inwards, ripped from their hinges as if they were made of paper. A figure stood silhouetted against the bright afternoon sun, a mountain of muscle and sheer, indomitable will. His iconic hair tufts seemed to defy gravity, and though his face was cast in shadow, there was no mistaking the sheer presence he exuded. He was not smiling. "Have no fear, students," the voice thundered, a promise and a threat all in one. "I am here, All Might." The wave of relief that should have washed over Izuku was instantly chilled by the cold presence of the ring. It was like pouring water on dry ice. All Might's eyes, burning with a righteous fury, took in the scene in a fraction of a second. The scattered villains. The injured 13. The students, terrified but alive. Aizawa, broken and unmoving on the ground. And finally, his successor, half in, half out of the water, with a strange, dark energy coalescing around his hand. Shigaraki let out a frustrated hiss. TCH. The final boss appeared just when we found the hidden treasure. Game over, I guess. We'll have to come back for it later. He turned to the swirling purple mist that was Kurogyri. Let's go. But Tamura Shigaraki, Kurogyri's ethereal voice protested, if we could just capture the boy. No! Shigaraki snapped. Look at him. He's not smiling. He's angry. We're not ready for that fight. We'll retreat and level up. But... His red eyes locked onto Izuku, specifically onto the black ring on his finger. We are definitely coming back for that. In a blur of motion too fast for the eye to follow, All Might had crossed the plaza, dispatching the lower-tier villains with single, non-lethal blows. He was moving towards the Nomu, his face a mask of grim determination. Kurogyri began to envelop Shigaraki and the Nomu in his warp gate. Shigaraki's final, parting words were a raspy promise directed solely at Izuku. I'll be seeing you, hero. That power you have, it doesn't belong to you. And then they were gone. The plaza was suddenly, unnervingly quiet, save for the whimpers of the injured and the sound of All Might's heavy breathing. The symbol of peace stood tall, the immediate threat vanquished. He turned, his heroic gaze softening as he began to account for his students. His eyes fell on Izuku. Young Midoriya. Are you ALRI? He stopped mid-sentence. The black, shadowy energy around Izuku's hand hadn't vanished. It was pulsing slowly, in time with his frantic heartbeat. But more than that, All Might could see the green sparks of one for all flickering weakly around Izuku's arm, trying to manifest. And where the green lightning touched the black aura, it seemed to snuff out, consumed by the darkness. It was like watching light being swallowed by a void. Young Midoriya, what is that? All Might asked, his voice losing its booming quality, becoming tight with a confusion that was rapidly turning to alarm. For Izuku, the world was starting to spin. The adrenaline was gone, leaving him with only his injuries, his exhaustion, and the psychic trauma of the ring's fusion. The cold voice was gone, but an echo of its emptiness remained, a permanent whisper at the edge of his consciousness. He could feel the ring, a cold, heavy weight on his soul. He could feel the hollow power it contained, a promise of strength born from endings. He looked at All Might, his mentor, the man who had given him his dream. He opened his mouth to answer, to explain, but no words came out. He saw the concern on All Might's face morph into something else, something he had never seen there before, a flicker of genuine fear. The strength that had held him up, a mixture of his own will and the ring's parasitic energy, evaporated all at once. The black aura dissolved into nothing. The flickering green sparks of one for all died. His vision swam, a tunnel of black closing in from all sides. His last conscious thought was of Aizawa's unmoving form. His last sensation was the unnatural, permanent cold of the ring fused to his finger. Izuku Midoriya collapsed into the shallow, blood-tinged water, unconscious. All Might was at his side in an instant, lifting his successor from the water. He was light to light. He's all right. He's just unconscious. All Might boomed, reassuring the other students who were now cautiously approaching. Kirishima and Bakugo had arrived, their own battles won, their faces a mixture of shock and relief. But as All Might cradled the boy, his heroic reassurance was a lie. His smile was a mask, hiding a growing, chilling dread. He looked at Izuku's right hand. The ring was stark against the boy's pale skin, the strange symbol seeming to mock him. It was fused to the flesh seamless, as if it had been forged there. Hesitantly, All Might reached out with his free hand and brushed his thumb against the ring's surface. An intense, biting cold shot up his arm, a cold that felt intimately, horribly familiar. It was the cold of his wound, the chill of the death he kept at bay every single day. It was the feeling of a void, an antithesis to the vibrant, life-giving energy of one for all that resided within him. His breath hitched. He had bestowed upon this earnest, hopeful boy the sacred torch of heroism, a power meant to inspire, to protect, to be a shining symbol of peace. But as he looked down at the unremovable black ring and felt its dead, hungry chill, a terrible question bloomed in his heart. What else had Izuku Midoriya inherited here today? The first thing to breach the thick, syrupy fog of unconsciousness was the cold. It was a stark and alien sensation, utterly at odds with the gentle warmth enveloping the rest of his body. He was swaddled in soft blankets, the air smelled of sterile antiseptic and faint, flowery soap, and a steady, rhythmic beeping somewhere to his left provided a lulling metronome for his return to the waking world. It was the familiar, comforting environment of a recovery ward. But the cold was an intruder. It emanated from his right hand, a deep, penetrating chill that felt like it was coming from inside his very bones. It wasn't the numbness of a limb that had fallen asleep, nor the ache of a frost-nipped finger. This was an active, malevolent cold, the temperature of a tomb, and it was centered on the middle finger of his right hand. Izuku Midoriya's eyes snapped open. He was in UA's infirmary. The ceiling was a familiar, pristine white. The beeping was a heart monitor, its wires taped to his chest. Sunlight streamed through a large window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. He was safe. The villains were gone. All Might had come. He tried to sit up, a groan escaping his lips as a constellation of aches and pains made themselves known. His entire body felt like one massive, throbbing bruise. He remembered the fight, the Nomu, the fall into the water, and then everything went black. He flexed his left hand, the fingers sore but obedient. Then, with a surge of dread, he slowly, deliberately, lifted his right. It was still there, the ring. It was a seamless band of impossible black, fused to his finger, as if it had been forged there at the moment of his creation. The strange, downward-pointing triangular symbol was stark against his pale, scarred skin. It seemed to absorb the cheerful sunlight, creating a tiny void on his hand, and the cold was pouring from it, a constant, silent river of absolute zero that flowed directly into his soul. Panic, cold and sharp as the ring itself, lanced through him. He brought his left hand over, his fingers scrabbling desperately at the black band. He pulled, he twisted, he tried to pry a fingernail underneath it. Nothing. It didn't move. It didn't even feel like a separate object anymore. It felt like a part of his own anatomy, as immutable as the bone beneath it. "Oh no, oh no, no, no," he whispered, his breathing quickening, the heart monitor beside him picking up its frantic pace. The voice. He remembered the voice in his head. "You rage against the finality of the end. Rise." What was this thing? A villain's quirk? A curse? The memory of the black, light-devouring shield he had instinctively formed against the Noma's surfaced in his mind. It had been his power, yet not his. It had felt hollow, parasitic, hungry. The door to the room slid open with a soft hiss, and Recovery Girl hobbled in, her cane tapping a steady rhythm on the polished floor. "Ah, you're awake, dearie." "Gave us all quite the scare," she said, her voice its usual mix of grandmotherly concern and no-nonsense professionalism. "Lying in a puddle of water with a concussion and quirk exhaustion. You boys really did a number on yourselves." Izuku quickly hid his right hand under the blanket, his heart hammering against his ribs. "Recovery Girl, is everyone okay? Aizawa-sensei. I saw him." His voice trembled, the image of his teacher's broken body flashing behind his eyes. The elderly hero's expression softened. "Shoyuta is a stubborn Neo, but he'll live. He's in intensive care at Hosu General. Multiple fractures, severe facial trauma, but he'll recover. Thanks to you and the other students holding the line until All Might arrived." She patted his leg reassuringly. "Now let's have a look at you. Your own injuries were mostly superficial, thank goodness. Your primary issue was the extreme exhaustion. It was as if you'd used your quirk 10 times over, but your body shows none of the usual signs of backlash. No broken bones this time, which is a start. She moved to check the foredrip, her keen eyes scanning the readouts on the monitor. Your heart rate is a little erratic. Still feeling anxious? A little, Izuku stammered. It was a lot, I'll say. She finished her checks and then turned her full attention to him. Her gaze was sharp. Now, Midoriya. There's something else we need to discuss. All Might mentioned it. A new development. Izuku's blood ran cold. He knew what she was talking about. He clutched the blanket tighter around his hand. A new development? He feigned ignorance, his voice barely a squeak. Recovery Girl sighed, pulling up a small stool to sit beside his bed. Don't play coy, son. It doesn't suit you. All Might saw you manifest some kind of dark energy. A shield that stopped the Nomu cold, and then there's the matter of the ring he found on your hand. May I see it? This was it. The moment of truth. His mind raced, a frantic torrent of possibilities, each one more terrifying than the last. If he told them the truth, that a weird space rock had crashed and a sentient, malevolent ring had fused with him, they would think he was insane. Or worse, that he was compromised by a villain's quirk. They might quarantine him, study him. They might take one for all away, thinking it was too dangerous to entrust to someone with a parasitic entity attached to them. The dream he had just received, the dream of becoming the next symbol of peace, would die before it even truly began. The fear of losing that dream was a more potent force than the fear of the ring itself. He had to protect it. He had to protect All Might's legacy. He needed a lie. A good one. A believable one. He took a shaky breath and slowly pulled his right hand from under the blanket, laying it palm up on the white sheets. Recovery Girl leaned in, her eyes narrowing. She gently took his hand, her own warm, wrinkled fingers a stark contrast to the cold emanating from the ring. She poked at it, then tried to turn it, her brow furrowed in concentration. Extraordinary, she murmured, more to herself than to him. It appears to be a keratinous growth, fused directly with the epidermis and bone. Like an external part of your skeletal structure. I've never seen anything like it. It's not metal, not stone, it's biological. And it's draining heat at a remarkable rate. A biological growth. A part of him. That was his opening. I think it's part of my quirk, Izuku said, the lie feeling like sandpaper in his throat. Recovery Girl looked up, her gaze pinning him. Part of your quirk? Your quirk is super strength. A volatile, self-destructive power that you are only just beginning to control. This is something else entirely. I think I have too, he said, the lie growing, taking on a life of its own. He remembered what the doctor had said all those years ago, about the extra toe joint, about how he was a fourth-generation quirk user. What if he could twist that? Or maybe my quirk is more complex than we thought. When the Nomu was hurting Aizawa-sensei, I felt so helpless and angry. It was a different feeling from when I used one for, he caught himself, his eyes widening in panic. From when I used my strength. It was cold. And something inside me just answered. The door slid open again, and this time, the figure entering made Izuku's breath catch in his throat. It was All Might, but not the towering, smiling symbol of peace. It was his skeletal, true form. Toshinori Yagi looked gaunt, his eyes sunken, and the worry etched on his face seemed deeper than ever before. He closed the door behind him, the click of the lock sounding unnaturally loud. We need to talk, young Midoriya, Toshinori said, his voice a low, serious rumble. He pulled another stool over, creating an impromptu tribunal at Izuku's bedside. I was just getting the story from the boy, Recovery Girl said. He believes this ring and the power you witnessed are a secondary aspect of his quirk, awakened by the trauma of the attack. Toshinori's piercing blue eyes locked onto Izuku's. There was no warmth in them, only a deep, searching intensity. Is that what you believe, my boy? Izuku swallowed hard, his throat dry. Lying to Recovery Girl was one thing. Lying to All Might, the man who had bet his entire legacy on him, felt like a profound betrayal. But the alternative seemed so much worse. Yes, he said, forcing himself to meet his mentor's gaze. I didn't know I could do it. The power, it just came out. To protect myself. To protect Sia-san and my Netakun. Taishinori was silent for a long moment, studying Izuku's face. He looked down at the ring, his expression unreadable. The energy I saw, it was black. Silent. It didn't feel like a living thing, like a quirk. It felt empty. When I touched the ring on your finger after you collapsed, the cold from it, it felt like the void. It felt like death. The word hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Izuku flinched. He knew All Might was right. That's exactly what it had felt like. But he had to sell the lie. His analytical mind, which had spent years dissecting quirks, kicked into gear, constructing a plausible framework for his deception. And maybe that's what it is, he stammered, the words tumbling out in a classic Midoriya mutter, which ironically made it sound more genuine. A death aspect quirk. They're rare, but not unheard of. Quirks that manipulate decay, or necrosis, or fear. Maybe mine is tied to emotions. Strong negative emotions. At the USJ, with Aizawa-sensei, all I could feel was grief. And this power reacted to it. The shield was a defense, but maybe it can do other things. He was rambling, but a thread of a plausible narrative was forming. A latent quirk, triggered by trauma, powered by negative emotions. It was the kind of textbook case study they might read about in class. Have you given it a name? Recovery Girl asked, her clinical curiosity piqued. A name. He needed a name. Not Black Lantern power. Something subtle. Something that sounded like a quirk. His mind flashed back to a book on mythology he'd read. The Underworld. The Five Rivers. Styx, Acheron, Cocytus, Phlegethon, and Lethe. The river of forgetfulness and oblivion. Oblivion. Emptiness. It was perfect. Lethe, Izuku said, the name tasting strange on his tongue. I'll call it Lethe. Toshinori leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his skeletal hands clasped together. Young Midoriya. Izuku. One for all is a torch, passed from one to another. It is a sacred trust. It has never, in its entire history, manifested a secondary power like this. It is a singular, stockpiling quirk. What you have, it feels like an intruder. A parasite latched onto your soul. The accuracy of the statement made Izuku's skin crawl. But it is mine, Izuku insisted, a desperate edge to his voice. It came from me. It saved me. Maybe it's my original quirk. The one I was supposed to have. Maybe it was just dormant all this time, and receiving one for all acted like a key, making it possible for it to finally awaken. It was a brilliant piece of misdirection, and he knew it. It explained the timing, it explained his quirkless past, and it tied everything back to One for All without making One for All the source. Recovery girls seem to be considering it. Quirk awakenings in adolescence are common, a latent quirk being kick-started by the introduction of a new, powerful biological agent like One for All. It's theoretically possible. Highly improbable, but not impossible. Toshinori, however, looked unconvinced. The fear in his eyes hadn't abated. Perhaps. But this is a dangerous path, my boy. A power fueled by grief and despair? Heroism is about inspiring hope, not feeding on sorrow. We will need to monitor this Lethe very, very closely. He stood up, his joints creaking. For now, get your rest. Your classmates have been cleared to go home, and your mother has been informed you are safe and recovering here. We will speak more on this later. With a final, troubled look, All Might left the room. Recovery Girl gave Izuku another dose of a mild sedative through his fore, telling him to sleep. As she left, she paused at the door. Lethe, the river of oblivion, she said softly. Be careful you don't drown in it, dearie. The door hissed shut, leaving Izuku alone in the quiet, sunlit room. He had done it. They had bought the lie, or at least, they had no evidence to refute it. He was safe, for now. One for All was safe, but as the sedative began to pull him under, a cold whisper slithered at the edge of his consciousness, an echo of the ring's empty voice. It wasn't in words, but in feelings. A sense of approval. a feeling of satisfaction. The lie, the deception, the negative emotions it had stirred in both himself and All Might, the ring had liked that. It had fed on it. Later that evening, after being cleared by Recovery Girl, Izuku was allowed to return to the quiet solitude of his own room at home. His mother had smothered him in a tearful, terrifying hug, but he had managed to reassure her he was fine, just exhausted. Now, sitting on his bed in the All Might themed shrine that was his bedroom, the cheerful, smiling face of his idol seemed to mock him from every poster and figurine. He felt like a fraud. He had lied, directly and repeatedly, to the man who was his entire world. But the lie was a necessity. He told himself that over and over. He had to understand this power, this thing, on his own terms before he could reveal its true nature. If he could control it, if he could use it for good, then the lie would be justified. He would confess everything to All Might later, when he could prove he wasn't a monster. He looked at his hand. The ring was a spot of utter blackness in the warm light of his desk lamp, a power fueled by grief and despair. All Might's words echoed in his head. The ring had reacted to his grief over Aizawa. It had fed on the fear at the USJ. It had enjoyed his deception. The fuel source was negative emotion. That was his first real clue. His analytical mind took over, the years of quirk analysis finally having a truly unknown subject to dissect. Hypothesis 1. The power is reactive. It requires an emotional trigger. Hypothesis 2. The fuel is negative emotion, specifically those related to loss, fear, and sorrow. Hypothesis 3. It can produce constructs of solid black energy. He had to test it. Consciously. Here, in the safety of his room, where no one could get hurt. But what could he use as a trigger? He thought about the USJ, about the Nomu, about the terror he felt. It was there, but it was a memory. The raw, overwhelming emotion was gone, replaced by a lingering anxiety. He tried to focus on it, to draw it out, but nothing happened. The ring remained cold and dormant. The ring's whisper returned, a subtle nudge in the back of his mind. Not a voice, but an idea. A suggestion. It wasn't looking for a memory of fear. It was looking for a purer source. It wanted grief, fresh grief. The whisper guided his thoughts, pulling a thread from his past. A memory from when he was 6 years old. Piku-chan. The name surfaced, and with it came a phantom sensation of tiny, scurrying feet in the palm of his hand. Piku-chan had been his dwarf hamster, his first pet. A tiny, fluffy ball of golden brown fur that he had loved with the fierce, all-consuming passion only a small child can have. He'd built him mazes out of cardboard tubes and saved his best sunflower seeds for him. And then, one morning, Piku-chan was still. He was curled in his nest, cold and stiff. His mother had explained that he was old, that it was his time. Izuku had cried for 3 days. He buried him in a small shoebox in the backyard under the old maple tree. The memory, dusty and distant, was now sharp and clear. The whisper of the ring was amplifying it, honing in on the lingering sadness, the ghost of that childhood heartbreak. He could feel the phantom weight of the shoebox in his hands. He could feel the hot tears on his 6-year-old cheeks. The grief, old and faded, was becoming new again. He felt a familiar, sick surge of strength from the ring. It was feeding. Focus, the silent suggestion urged him. Remember him. Everything about him. The way his whiskers twitched. The softness of his fur. The shape of his little body. Izuku closed his eyes, his brow furrowed in concentration. He did as the ring suggested, not because he wanted to, but because he had to know. He pictured the hamster in his mind's eye, a perfect, detailed image built from a foundation of love and loss. He felt a strange tugging sensation from the ring. He opened his eyes. On the floor in front of him, motes of black dust were coalescing. They swirled in the air, drawn together by an unseen force, absorbing the light. The motes knitted themselves together, forming a solid, three-dimensional shape. It took less than 5 seconds. Standing on his bedroom floor, silent and still, was a perfect, life-size construct of Piku-chan. It was made of the same light-devouring black material as the shield. It had no color, only shades of shadow. But the shape was perfect. The tiny, rounded ears. The stubby tail. The delicate paws. It was a hauntingly accurate silhouette of his deceased pet. Izuku's breath caught in his chest. A wave of nausea washed over him. The construct moved. It took a hesitant step forward, its movements unnervingly fluid, a perfect imitation of a living hamster. It paused, lifting its head, and looked at Izuku. Its eyes were not the glossy black beads he remembered. They were two pinpricks of glowing, empty light, each one bearing the same symbol as the ring. They were windows into the void. The construct was not alive. It was a puppet. A horrifyingly accurate puppet animated by a cold, alien power, built from the blueprint of his own loving memory. And seeing it, this perversion of something he had once cherished, didn't bring him comfort. It brought the old grief crashing back, fresh and raw, as if the loss had just happened moments ago. He felt a sob catch in his throat, a deep, wrenching sorrow for the small, innocent life he had lost. And as he felt that wave of renewed grief, the ring on his finger pulsed with a faint, almost imperceptible warmth, or rather, a lessening of its absolute cold. The construct on the floor seemed to stand a little straighter, its form becoming sharper, more defined. Izuku felt a sick sense of strength flow into him, a cold energy that mirrored the intensity of his sorrow. He understood. The ring hadn't just used his memory as a blueprint. It had used the act of him remembering, the act of him grieving, as the power source. And now, the existence of this ghastly puppet was creating a feedback loop. Its presence made him grieve, and his grief empowered it. "No," he whispered, shaking his head. "Stop. Go away." He waved his hand, trying to bat the image away, to break his concentration. The construct flickered. He squeezed his eyes shut, forcing the memory down, pushing away the sadness and replacing it with a frantic, desperate wall of clinical analysis. It's not him. It's a construct of solidified energy, a projection. It is not real. Starved of its emotional fuel, the construct began to dissolve. It crumbled from the tail forward, breaking apart into the same black motes it had formed from. The motes hung in the air for a second before fading into nothingness, leaving no trace they had ever been there. Izuku was left alone in his room, gasping for breath, his body trembling. He stared at the spot where the construct had been, then down at the ring on his finger. He had power over death. Or, more accurately, he had the power to create a mockery of it. He could summon the dead, not as they were, but as he remembered them, turning his love and his loss into weapons. And the power itself was sentient enough to guide him, to teach him how to desecrate his own memories for its sustenance. Shigaraki's words came back to him. "That power you have, it doesn't belong to you." He was right. This wasn't his power. He was its host. In the dead of night, in an office at the highest point of UA High, a very different meeting was taking place. Principal Nizu, a steaming cup of tea held delicately in his paws, sat behind his large desk. Across from him sat the skeletal form of Toshinori Yagi. In a third chair, heavily bandaged and sitting stiffly, was Shoyuta Aizawa, who had discharged himself from the hospital against every doctor's explicit order. His face was a swollen roadmap of bruises, his arm was in a heavy cast, but his eyes, though bloodshot, were as sharp and analytical as ever. "A second quirk named Lethe, you say," Niza said, his whiskers twitching. "Powered by grief and manifesting as a shield of solid darkness. And this?" He gestured with his cup towards Aizawa. "Young Midoriya believed you were dead." The emotional catalyst was, by all accounts, extreme. It felt like a lie, Toshinori stated bluntly, his voice heavy. "The boy is earnest to a fault. He is a terrible liar." But he was desperate. I could see it in his eyes. He was terrified, not of the villains, but of my reaction. Of our reaction. Aizawa shifted, a pained grunt escaping his lips. "I agree. The explanation is too neat. A latent quirk, conveniently triggered by the introduction of one for all? It's a plausible theory, which is exactly why it sounds like something Midoriya would invent on the spot. He's smart enough to build a convincing lie." He looked at Toshinori. "You felt it. You said it was the antithesis of life." Toshinori nodded grimly. "One for all is a warmth. A fire. It's the combined will and vitality of 8 generations of heroes. When I brushed against that ring, it was like touching absolute zero. Not just physical cold, but a spiritual one. The kind of cold that promises only stillness and silence. If one for all is a song, that ring is the void between notes. Nisa took a slow sip of his tea, his beady black eyes distant in thought. An interesting metaphor. We are dealing with an unknown variable of the highest order. Let us operate on two assumptions. Assumption A, Midoriya is telling the truth. He has a rare, dual-factor quirk. In this case, we must help him control this new, dangerous aspect and integrate it with one for all. It will be difficult, but not impossible. He paused, setting his cup down with a soft click. And then there is assumption B. He is lying. The ring and its power are external. An alien artifact, a paranormal parasite, a new form of quirk crafting technology we are unaware of. This is the far more dangerous possibility. It would mean our most promising student, the inheritor of One for All, is compromised by an unknown, potentially malevolent entity. So what do we do? Aizawa asked, his voice a low rasp. Pull him from the hero course? Isolate him? No, Toshinori and Nisa said in unison. If we do that, we alienate him, Toshinori elaborated. We prove his fears right. Whatever that thing is, it's a part of him now. If we treat him like a monster, we might just push him into becoming one. He needs guidance. He needs trust. Even if we have to fake it. Nisa nodded in agreement. Precisely. We will proceed publicly under Assumption A. We will accept his story of the quirk Lethe. We will provide counseling and specialized training to help him control it. This maintains his trust and allows us to observe the power in a controlled environment. Privately, we will operate under Assumption B. The principal's eyes glinted with a sharp, strategic light. Toshinori, you will focus on the interaction between One for All and this Lethe. You are the only one who can feel the spiritual ramifications. Aizawa, your quirk is erasure. While this power may not be a quirk, we must discover if it can be nullified. You are the perfect diagnostic tool. I, in the meantime, will devote my resources to researching the object itself. The symbol. The material. Any historical or fringe science reports of similar phenomena, Aizawa grunted. So we lie to him, too. We pretend to believe him while secretly treating him like a walking time bomb. We are not lying, Nisa corrected gently. We are providing him with the support he thinks he needs, while preparing for the crisis we fear is coming. It is the only logical course of action. He looked at the two men, his expression uncharacteristically grave. All Might is a symbol of peace. A beacon of hope. For 8 generations, One for All has represented the best of humanity. We cannot, under any circumstances, allow that legacy to become attached to a power that feeds on sorrow and weaponizes death. Toshinori looked down at his own trembling hand. He thought of his predecessor, Nana Shimura, and the hopes she had placed in him. He thought of the earnest, crying boy on the rooftop who had, against all odds, proven himself a true hero. He had promised the boy he could become a hero. Now, he feared he had set him on a path to become something else entirely. And he, All Might, the symbol of peace, would have to stand by and watch, guiding a force he could not comprehend, all while pretending that everything was going to be okay. It was the first time in a long time that Toshinori Yagi felt truly, utterly afraid. The air in training ground Gamma was still and quiet, a stark contrast to the storm raging inside Izuku Midoriya's soul. This particular facility was one of UA's more secluded zones, a wide, flat expanse of reinforced earth surrounded by high concrete walls, designed for large-scale quirk assessment without the collateral damage risk of the cityscape replicas. It felt less like a training ground and more like an arena. Or an examination room. Izuku stood in the center of the dusty circle, the afternoon sun casting his long, nervous shadow behind him. 50 yards away, in the shade of the observation platform, stood Toshinori Yagi, not All Might, the symbol of peace, but the gaunt, skeletal man who carried the weight of that symbol on his frail shoulders. His presence today was not that of a booming, encouraging mentor. It was that of a concerned, almost clinical observer. A doctor examining a strange and worrying new symptom. Just like we practiced, young Midoriya, Toshinori called out, his voice thin in the open air but carrying a forced casualness. Let's start with a baseline. 5%. Full cowling. I want to see you hold it for 3 minutes. Focus on maintaining the flow, keeping it even throughout your body. This was familiar. This was safe. This was the diligent, painstaking work they had been doing for weeks, teaching his body to become a proper vessel for the sacred torch of one for all. But today, everything was different. Today, he was a liar. And the cold, hard proof of his lie was fused to his right hand. The black ring felt heavier than usual, its profound cold a constant, draining presence. He had taken to wearing a fingerless glove over his right hand, a flimsy attempt to hide the ring from his classmates' view, claiming his hand was still sensitive from the USJ attack. No one had questioned it. But here, under the scrutinizing gaze of his mentor, there were no such pretenses. Right. 5%! Izuku shouted back, his voice a little too loud, a little too eager. He took a deep breath, planting his feet in the dirt. He closed his eyes and reached inward, searching for that familiar, glorious wellspring of power. He found it. The crackling, vibrant sun of One for All, burning brightly within him. It was the legacy of heroes, a symphony of courage and self-sacrifice, and as he drew upon it, he focused on the image that had always been his anchor, All Might's fearless, triumphant smile. Green lightning, pure and brilliant, sparked to life across his skin. The warmth spread through his limbs, a familiar and welcome rush of power. For a glorious, fleeting second, it was perfect. He was in control. Then the cold reacted. It was like plunging a live wire into a vat of liquid nitrogen. The moment One for All's energy coursed through his right arm, the ring responded. A jolt of absolute zero shot from his finger, not to fight the power, but to intercept it. He let out a sharp, ragged gasp as the two forces met within his own body. The sensation was uniquely agonizing. It wasn't the searing pain of a broken bone. It was a sizzling numbness, a violent clash of fundamental opposites happening at a cellular level. The warmth of One for All was being consumed, smothered by a parasitic cold. The power didn't stop, but it changed. It became sluggish, viscous, like trying to force pure electricity through a conduit filled with tar. He looked down at his arms. The sight made his stomach clench. The beautiful, heroic green lightning of full cowling was no longer pure. Thin, greasy tendrils of black smoke seemed to writhe out from his right hand, coiling around the emerald sparks like hungry serpents. Where the blackness touched the green, the light of One for All seemed to dim, turning a sickly, jaundiced shade before sputtering out. The iconic crackle of power was now accompanied by a low, dissonant hum, a sound that felt fundamentally wrong. Young Midoriya! All Might's voice was sharp, laced with an alarm he could no longer conceal. What is that? What's happening? I don't know. Izuku grunted, his teeth clenched. The power felt disgusting. The usual surge of heroic energy, the feeling that he could leap to the sky, was gone. In its place was a cold, predatory focus. He didn't feel like a hero ready to save someone. He felt like a hunter waiting for its prey to weaken. It's lethe. It's mixing with it. He tried to fight it. He doubled down on his focus, pouring more of his will into One for All, forcing the imagery of All Might's heroism into his mind. I am the symbol of peace. I save people with a smile. This cold is not me. With a surge of immense effort, he managed to push the green energy through the corrupting influence. The black tendrils receded slightly, and the green sparks brightened, though they still looked tainted and unhealthy. He was holding the 5%, but it felt like he was wrestling a dragon to do it. The strain was immense, far greater than a simple full cowling should ever be. Sweat beaded on his forehead, and his muscles, instead of feeling empowered, screamed with a strange, deep-set fatigue. From his vantage point, Toshinori watched in horror. He didn't need to be close to feel the change. One for All was a part of his very soul. He could sense its resonance, its song, in his successor. For weeks, that song had been growing stronger, clearer. Now, it was a discordant, jarring mess. It was like hearing a beautiful symphony being interrupted by the grating screech of nails on a chalkboard. The power of life, hope, and courage was being actively poisoned by an energy that felt of decay, silence, and the grave. His lie about lethe being a separate quirk was a flimsy shield against the terrible truth. The two powers weren't coexisting. One was consuming the other. "Stop, my boy! Power down!" Tashinori ordered, his voice tight. Izuku immediately cut the flow, collapsing to his knees with a ragged gasp. The black tendrils vanished, the sickly green lightning died, and he was left trembling, not from backlash, but from a profound, soul-deep exhaustion. Using one for all for less than a minute had left him feeling more drained than breaking his entire arm. He stared at his right hand, at the offending ring. It was just a band of black keratin, silent and still. But he could feel a sickening, smug satisfaction emanating from it. It had tasted one for all, and it wanted more. As Tashinori hurried across the field towards him, a new and terrifying sensation prickled at the back of Izuku's mind. It was the ring. It was looking. Not with eyes, but with its senses. And it wasn't looking at the outside world. It was looking inward. He felt a cold, analytical presence sweep through his own consciousness, cataloging, assessing. It was searching for the source of the power it had just tasted. It followed the channels of one for all back from his limbs, deep into the core of his being, to the place where the vestiges resided. The vestige world, as Izuku had come to think of it, had always been a quiet, hazy space. A room of misty shadows where he could sometimes feel the presence of the past users. There was a silent chorus of support. Now, for the first time, that inner sanctum was being invaded. He felt a spike of cold psychic pressure, as if a needle of ice was being driven into his mind. He cried out, clutching his head. "Young Midoriya? What's wrong? Is it a headache?" Tashinori knelt beside him, his hand hovering hesitantly over Izuku's shoulder. "It's in my head," Izuku gasped, his vision swimming. "The ring, it's searching for something." Inside the metaphysical space of One for All, the 8 consciousnesses stirred. They were not fully aware, not truly sentient in the way of the living, but they were a collective presence, a library of wills and experiences. They had felt the intrusion. A foreign consciousness, cold and predatory, was at their doorstep. It was rattling the lock, testing the walls. It was an entity whose very nature was antithetical to their own. They were the echoes of life, preserved by a power of life. This thing was an echo of the end, and the ring, in its cold, emotionless assessment, recognized the vestiges for what they were. They were not memories. They were not ghosts in the traditional sense. They were stockpiled life forces, consciousnesses preserved beyond the point of their physical deaths. They were, by its own horrifying definition, entities of death. And it was hungry. It saw them not as a sacred legacy, but as a feast. 8 potent, power-filled souls, just waiting to be harvested. Fuel. "My boy, talk to me. What are you feeling?" Tashinori's voice was filled with a desperate urgency. He could see Izuku's eyes glazing over, his face paling dramatically. They're scared," Izuku whispered, his voice distant. He could feel the alarm of the vestiges, a panicked ripple through the core of his being. They were recoiling from the ring's cold, avaricious gaze. Tashinori felt a chill that had nothing to do with his own failing health. He knew what Izuku meant. He was talking about the previous users. The parasite was not just corrupting the power, it was now targeting the very souls of those who had wielded it. "Focus on my voice, young Midoriya," Tashinori said, trying to anchor him. "Don't let it." He was cut off. In his desperation to help, to offer some kind of guidance, he made a terrible, unintentional mistake. He chose the wrong words. "Listen to me, my boy. This is your power to command. One for All chose you. The will of my master, Nana Shimura, rests with you. Don't let this thing defile her memory." Nana Shimura. The name was a key. A targeting solution. The ring had been scanning a crowd of 8 souls. Now, it had a name, a specific identity to lock onto, one that was clearly tied to a deep emotional resonance within its host's mentor. The effect was instantaneous and absolute. The world vanished. It didn't fade to black. It was erased. One moment, Izuku was on his knees in the dirt, the concerned face of All Might filling his vision. The next, he was floating in a silent, featureless, and infinite void. There was no up or down, no light or shadow, only a profound and suffocating blackness that stretched in all directions. The warmth of the sun, the feeling of the ground beneath his knees, the sound of Tashinori's voice, all gone. He was utterly, terrifyingly alone. Panic seized him. He tried to scream, but no sound came out. The air, if it could be called that, was too thin, too empty to carry a vibration. He was in the heart of the ring's power. He was in the place the black shield had come from. He was in the void. A shape began to coalesce in the darkness before him. It was not a sudden appearance. It was a gathering, a weaving of nothingness into form. Specks of deeper black knitted themselves together, like iron filings drawn to a magnet, slowly building a human silhouette. Izuku watched in paralyzed horror as the shape resolved. It was a woman. She wore a hero costume he recognized instantly from All Might's stories and old photographs. A dark, sleeveless bodysuit with a high collar, a pale cape, and sturdy boots. Her black hair was styled in a familiar bob. A gentle, reassuring smile was fixed on her face. It was Nana Shimura, the seventh user of One for All. All Might's master. A hero who had died fighting All for One, but it wasn't her. It was a blasphemous effigy. Her costume was devoid of color, rendered in 100 shades of lifeless gray and black. Her skin was the color of ash. The smile on her face was a dead thing, a mask of warmth stretched over an abyss of cold. It didn't reach her eyes. Her eyes. God, her eyes. They were not the kind, determined eyes Izuku had seen in pictures. They were two perfect, black voids, pits of absolute nothingness that seemed to drink the very concept of light. And in the center of each void, a familiar symbol burned with a faint, chilling glow. The symbol from the ring. The emblem of the Black Lanterns. Her gaze was not a gaze. It was an event horizon. To look into her eyes was to feel your own spirit being unmade. She floated before him, her posture serene, her hands clasped gently in front of her. When she spoke, the voice was a perfect mimicry of the few audio recordings that existed of her. But it was hollowed out, stripped of all life and emotion. It was an echo of the ring's own empty voice, wearing Nana Shimura's tone like a stolen coat. Izuku Midoriya. The sound vibrated directly in his skull. Why do you struggle so? The Nana construct asked, its head tilting with a movement that was too smooth, too perfect to be human. You fight against your own nature. You cling to a half measure, a borrowed light. Izuku couldn't speak. He could only float there, trembling, a prisoner in his own mind. The construct raised a hand, gesturing to the infinite blackness around them. This power you hold. One for all, it is the power of a single life, passed down until it gutters out. A candle flame in a hurricane. It is finite. It is fragile. It ends. Her dead, smiling face drifted closer. The cold intensified, seeping into his phantom limbs, making his very soul feel brittle. We can offer you more, she whispered, her voice a promise of utter damnation. The power you felt, the cold, that is the only true, eternal strength. Not the strength of one life, but the collective strength of all who have ended. Every soul that has ever flickered out. Their power, their knowledge, their pain, it is all just waiting. A symphony of silence. An army of endings. Thin, black tendrils of energy, identical to the ones that had corrupted his full calling, began to seep from the construct of Nana. They snaked through the void towards him, not with aggression, but with a caressing, inviting slowness. Your mentor, the hollow voice continued, the eighth, he is dying. You feel it, don't you? His candle flame is low. He burns himself out to give you his light. A noble, futile gesture. He will end, and you will be left alone with his fading memory. The tendrils reached him, and where they touched his spectral form, they did not burn or hurt. They felt cold, soothing, like an end to all pain. But he doesn't have to fade, the nanoconstruct said, her empty eyes boring into him. The smile on her face widened a fraction, becoming predatory. With our power, you can make him permanent. You can give him an ending that never ends. He can be with you forever. Just like me. One of the tendrils wrapped gently around his arm. He felt a drain, a pull. The ring was trying to draw him in completely, to make him surrender his will to the void. All you have to do is let go, she cooed, her voice now a chorus of whispering emptiness. Let go of their hope. It is a lie. There is only one truth. One certainty. Let go, and embrace their end. The blackness began to overwhelm him. The tendrils multiplied, wrapping around his legs, his torso, his neck. He was being cocooned in the void. He felt his consciousness, his very sense of self, begin to fray at the edges, dissolving into the cold, silent promise of the ring. He was dying, and a part of him, the part that was exhausted and terrified and grieving, was starting to welcome it. No! The sound was a physical impact. The void shattered like black glass. Izuku was back in his own body, on his knees in the dirt of training ground Gamma. The sun was a blinding lance in his eyes. The air was hot and tasted of dust and ozone, and the source of the impact was Toshinori's hands, gripping his shoulders with a desperate, trembling strength, shaking him violently. Young Midoriya! Izuku, look at me! Breathe! Izuku sucked in a huge, shuddering breath, a sound halfway between a gasp and a sob. His eyes were wide with a terror so profound it was almost sublime. A thin trickle of blood ran from his nose, a stark line of crimson against his deathly pale face. She, he stammered, his body shaking uncontrollably. It was Nana Shimura, but it wasn't her, her eyes, oh God, her eyes. He collapsed forward, burying his face in Toshinori's thin chest, his body racked with violent, tearless sobs. He wasn't just crying. He was purging a trauma that had been inflicted directly upon his soul. Toshinori held his successor, his own heart hammering against his ribs. He had watched the boy go completely catatonic, his eyes glazed and unfocused, a small trickle of blood appearing beneath his nose. He had shouted his name, getting no response. He had seen the faint, sick pulsing of the black ring on his finger. And he had felt a terror that eclipsed anything he had ever felt on the battlefield. He had said her name. He had mentioned his master. And that thing, that parasite, had used it. It had weaponized his words, weaponized his own memory of Nana, and turned it into an instrument of psychic torture against the boy he had sworn to protect. The violation was absolute. He held Izuku, murmuring meaningless reassurances, but his mind was reeling. This was not a passive parasite. This was not just a corrupting influence. It was an active, intelligent predator. It had invaded his student's mind, assessed the sacred power of One for All, and identified its previous wielders as a food source. And it had just demonstrated, in the most horrific way possible, that it could create puppets of the dead to tempt and torture the living. Izuku finally pulled back, his face a mess of terror and dawning comprehension. He looked at All Might, his green eyes filled with a new kind of horror. All Might, he whispered, his voice hoarse. The vestiges, the ones inside One for All. It sees them. It called them entities of death. It wants them. It wants to use them. Like it just used her. The unspoken horror hung between them. The ghost in the machine, the wise and silent counsel of past heroes that were a fundamental part of One for All's legacy, were no longer just advisors. They were no longer a source of spiritual strength. They were now a potential fuel source for a cosmic horror that had taken root in Izuku's soul. Every hero who had ever wielded One for All, every life given in service of peace, was now in danger of being desecrated, their memory twisted into a hollow-eyed puppet, their spirit consumed to power an engine of despair. The training session was over. The lesson, however, was brutally clear. The battle for Izuku Midoriya's soul would not be fought on a training ground or a city street. It would be fought in the quiet, sacred space within himself. And he was not just defending his own future as a hero. He was now the unwilling guardian of the souls of all the heroes who had come before him. The weeks following the disastrous training session were a silent, undeclared Cold War. Outwardly, life at UA High continued with a determined, almost frantic, sense of normalcy. Classes resumed, Aizawa-sensei returned to teach, his face a web of pale scars and his arm in a sling, his presence a grim but reassuring constant. The upcoming sports festival was the talk of the school, a beacon of youthful ambition and heroic potential that everyone, students and faculty alike, clung to as a symbol of resilience. But for Izuku Midoriya, normalcy was a ghost. The war was being fought on two fronts. The first was internal. He was terrified of One for All. The link to the vestiges, once a source of wonder and connection, now felt like a live wire to a bomb. He hadn't dared to access the power since the vision of Nana Shimura. The memory of her hollow eyes and the soul-deep cold of the void was a permanent scar on his psyche. He spent his nights in a state of high-strung exhaustion, terrified to sleep too deeply for fear of what the ring might show him in his dreams. He felt the cold, patient presence of the ring on his finger at all times, a silent predator waiting for a moment of weakness. The second front was external. His relationship with All Might had become strained and formal. Their private training sessions had ceased. They still spoke, but their conversations were stilted, filled with the unspoken horror of what they both now knew. All Might would look at him with a pained, desperate hope, while Izuku couldn't meet his mentor's gaze without feeling a hot flush of shame and fear. He was a tainted vessel, a walking desecration of the sacred power he had been gifted. He focused all his energy on his physical training and his studies, throwing himself into a routine so grueling it left him too exhausted to think. He ran until his lungs burned, lifted weights until his muscles screamed, and filled notebooks with frantic, obsessive analyses of his classmates' quirks. It was a desperate attempt to feel like a hero in training, to prove to himself that he was more than the monster fused to his hand. He needed to save someone. He needed a win, a pure, uncomplicated act of heroism that would reaffirm his path and wash the taste of the void from his soul. The opportunity came, as they so often do in a world of heroes, without warning. It was a Saturday afternoon. Izuku had been given permission to leave campus to run an errand for his mother in the Kiyoshi Ward shopping district, a bustling, multi-level commercial hub popular with families. The air was filled with the sounds of commerce, the chatter of crowds, and the distant, ever-present wail of sirens that was the city's heartbeat. He was on his way to the station, a bag of groceries in his hand, when the ground shuddered. It wasn't an earthquake. It was a rhythmic, concussive thump, 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 each impact shaking the glass in the storefronts and sending panicked vibrations up through the soles of his shoes. Screams erupted from the plaza ahead. A wave of people, their faces masks of terror, came flooding down the street, running from whatever was causing the destruction. Villain attack! Someone shrieked. A big one! Izuku's hero instincts, long suppressed by fear, ignited instantly. He dropped the grocery bag, the sound of shattering glass jars lost in the growing chaos. He ran towards the danger, weaving through the terrified crowd, his mind already racing, analyzing, assessing. He skidded to a halt at the edge of the central plaza, his eyes widening at the scene of pandemonium. The villain was colossal. It wasn't human, but a hulking brute of rock and obsidian, easily 20 feet tall. Its body was a jagged collection of sharp, crystalline plates, and its head was a massive, horned skull that looked like it belonged to some prehistoric beast. It wasn't a person with a gigantification quirk. It was a golem, a monster of living stone. And it was being ridden. Perched on its broad, stony shoulders was a man in a garish purple suit, cackling with manic glee. He held a strange, metallic scepter that pulsed with a faint violet light. With every swing of the scepter, the golem would smash its massive fist into the ground or the sides of buildings, sending debris and panicked civilians flying. "Dance, my pretties, dance!" The villain shrieked, his voice amplified by a speaker on his lapel. The great geode and his masterpiece, Basalt, are here to make their debut. A little chaos to liven up your boring Saturday. The pro-heroes were already on the scene. The reptilian hero Ryukyu was in her massive dragon form, trying to grapple with the golem, but the creature's immense strength and jagged body made it difficult to get a solid hold. The Fiber Master hero, Best Jeanist, was attempting to restrain the golem's legs with massive cables of denim, but the stone monster was simply shattering them with every step. Several smaller heroes were focused on evacuation, forming perimeters and guiding screaming families to safety. Izuku watched, his heart pounding. The heroes were outmatched. Ryukyu could match its size, but not its raw, brute force. Best Jeanist's quirk was ill-suited for this kind of opponent. They were holding the line, but they were losing. A section of a building's facade, weakened by the golem's rampage, began to crumble. A family, a mother, a father, and a small child in a bright red coat, were frozen in terror directly beneath it, paralyzed by fear as a multi-ton slab of concrete and steel groaned above them. There was no time. The other heroes were too far away, too occupied. This was it. His moment. Izuku reached for one for all. He focused, pushing past the terror, calling on the power. The green lightning sputtered to life, but it was weak, hesitant, and immediately the cold from the ring surged to meet it. The sickening, black tendrils began to writhe around his arm, the power turning sluggish and foul. He didn't have time to fight it. He couldn't risk a 5% jump when the power was so corrupted and unstable. He might miscalculate, ending up a splat on the pavement, or, worse, overshooting and hurting the very people he was trying to save. The slab of concrete broke free. It fell. The family screamed. Izuku was frozen. His mind, his body, his very quirk had failed him. Useless. He was useless. He was going to watch them die, just like he had almost watched Aizawa die. All this power, the legacy of All Might and the curse of the ring, and he couldn't even save 3 people. Desperation, stark and absolute, ripped through him. It was a feeling deeper than fear, colder than despair. It was the primal, hopeless agony of a savior who cannot save. And the ring, ever patient, ever hungry, felt its opening. A whisper slithered through his mind, no longer a subtle suggestion but a clear, cold, logical statement. The living are weak. Their power is finite. Their bodies are fragile. You see it now. Your one for all fails you when you need it most. It is not enough. Shut up, Izuku whimpered, his eyes locked on the falling debris. But their memory is strong. Their legacy is eternal. The heroes who have fallen, they are not gone. They are merely waiting. Their stories, their courage, their quirks, they are an echo in the heart of this world. An echo you can command. The slab was halfway down. Time seemed to slow to a crawl. He could see the terror on the mother's face, the father's arms wrapped protectively around his child. They wish for a hero. They pray for a miracle. The living have failed them. Show them a hero of the fallen. Show them a true hero. One whose story is already complete. One who can no longer fail. The whisper wasn't a temptation anymore. It was the only option. It was a lifeline of pure darkness thrown to a drowning boy. Save them. That was the only thing that mattered. The method, the cost, none of it mattered in the face of their imminent deaths. Yes, Izuku whispered, the word of surrender. A prayer to a dead god. Please. He didn't know who to call upon. He didn't have time to think. His mind, in its frantic, desperate state, latched onto a name. A hero whose tragic death had been national news just a few years ago. A hero whose agency had been based in this very ward. A hero known for his absolute, immovable defense. Cruella. The name echoed in his mind, and the ring responded instantly. He didn't need to focus on grief. The raw, overwhelming desperation was enough. It was a potent, delicious fuel. The ring on his finger pulsed, not with light, but with a wave of profound darkness. The black energy didn't erupt from him. It poured, a thick, silent torrent of liquid shadow that pooled on the ground at his feet. The crowd gasped. Best Jeanist, struggling with his denim cables, turned his head. What is that? The black energy swirled, rising from the ground like a waterspout of oil. It rapidly coalesced, knitting itself together, taking on a familiar, powerful shape. It formed a tall, broad-shouldered man in a distinctive hero costume, a heavy, full-body suit that looked like it was made of overlapping, flaky pastry, and a helmet that mimicked a baker's hat. The construct was finished in less than a second. It was a perfect, silent, monochrome replica of the fallen pro-hero, Cruller. Its body was a tapestry of shades of black and gray, and its eyes glowed with the cold, vacant light of the Black Lantern symbol. The construct of Cruller didn't hesitate. It didn't look at Izuku. Its head snapped up, its vacant gaze locking onto the falling slab of concrete. It moved, its speed unnatural, a blur of silent motion. It appeared directly over the terrified family, planting its feet and raising its arms. The slab of concrete, weighing several tons, slammed into the construct's outstretched hands. There was no earth-shattering boom. There was no cloud of dust from the impact. There was only a dull, flat thump. The construct of Cruller didn't buckle. It didn't strain. It caught the massive weight as easily as a man catching a beach ball. The kinetic energy, the sheer physics of the event, was simply negated, absorbed into its shadowy form. The family underneath was untouched, shielded by the silent, ghost-like hero. A profound silence fell over the plaza. The screaming stopped. The running stopped. Everyone, civilians, heroes, even the villain on the golem's shoulders, stared, utterly dumbfounded. The crawler construct, with a smooth, effortless motion, tossed the slab of concrete aside. It landed with a deafening crash in an empty section of the plaza, shattering into 1,000 pieces. The construct then turned, its empty, glowing eyes scanning the battlefield. On the villain's perch, Geode's cackling had died in his throat. What was that? Crawler? But he's dead. I saw the memorial. The Black Lantern crawler locked its gaze onto the golem. It took a single step, and the ground beneath its foot seemed to harden, turning the color of blackened iron. This was Crawler's quirk, crisp, the ability to absorb impacts and harden any surface he touched, making it brittle and easy to shatter. But this was a perversion of it. The ground didn't just get hard, it seemed to die, the energy within it nullified. The construct moved again, its silence more terrifying than any battle cry. It flowed across the plaza, a phantom of purpose. Ryukyu, in her dragon form, instinctively recoiled as it passed, a primal fear of its unnatural energy making the scales on her neck stand on end. The construct reached the golem's leg, where best genist fibers had failed. It placed one black, shadowy hand on the living stone. A spider web of black lines shot up the golem's leg, not like cracks, but like veins of necrosis. The stone around the construct's hand didn't just become brittle. It decayed, losing its structural integrity. With a sound like grinding gravel, the golem's leg crumbled, dissolving into a pile of dead black dust. The colossal beast, its balance gone, let out a silent, pained roar as it began to topple. Geode shrieked as his perch tilted violently, and he was thrown from its shoulders, his scepter flying from his grasp. Before the golem had even finished falling, the crawler construct was already moving. It appeared beneath the falling villain, catching him in another display of silent, effortless strength. It didn't save him gently. It simply stopped his momentum, its grip like iron. Then, in the same motion, it located the fallen scepter, crushed it under its foot into a twisted mess of metal, and stood there, holding the neutralized, whimpering villain. The battle was over. It had taken less than 10 seconds. The entire plaza was dead silent. The only sound was the wind whistling through the broken buildings and the soft, terrified sobs of the family that had been saved. Izuku was still standing where he had been, his hand outstretched, the glove fallen away to reveal the pulsing black ring. The wave of desperation had been replaced by a dizzying, nauseating rush of power. He could feel the awe, the confusion, and most of all, the fear of the crowd. Every spike of emotion was a trickle of energy, a delicious morsel for the ring. It felt good. It felt empowering, and that feeling made him sick to his very core. He had done it. He had saved them. But this wasn't the clean, triumphant feeling he had craved. This was a hollow, dirty victory, bought with a power that felt like a sacrilege. The media helicopters were already circling overhead, their cameras zoomed in. News drones buzzed closer, their lenses focused on the impossible scene, the defeated golem, the captured villain, and the silent, black-clad specter of a famously deceased hero. And then they focused on the UA student standing nearby, his hand crackling with a faint, dark energy. The crawler construct, its task complete, turned its head. Its glowing, empty eyes swept over the crowd, over the heroes, and finally, they landed on Izuku. For a moment, it stood perfectly still, a silent, dark statue. Then, like the construct of the hamster in his room, it began to dissolve. It crumbled into a swirling cloud of black motes, which were caught by the wind and dissipated into nothingness, leaving no trace it had ever existed. The spell was broken. The crowd erupted not with cheers, but with a cacophony of confused, frightened chatter. Was that Crawler? I thought he died in the Kyushu incident. Who was that kid? The UA student? What was that quirk? Did he summon a ghost? The questions washed over Izuku, each one a fresh wave of nausea. He looked at the family he had saved. The mother was staring at him, her hand over her mouth, her eyes wide with a mixture of gratitude and pure, undiluted terror. She wasn't looking at him like a hero. She was looking at him like he was a warlock, a necromancer, something that had tampered with the sacred laws of life and death. Best Genist approached him cautiously, his usual unflappable demeanor completely gone. "Young man, you're from UA." What in the world was that? Izuku couldn't answer. He just stared at his hand, at the ring. The lie he had constructed, the flimsy fiction of Lethe, was already crumbling. A defensive shield was one thing, a personal, emotional quirk was believable. But this? Summoning a perfect, combat-capable effigy of a dead hero? This was something else entirely. This was a miracle. This was a blasphemy. His misleading name, Lethe, was forgotten before it even had a chance to stick. The reporters in the helicopters, scrambling to make sense of what they had just witnessed, were already coining a new moniker. The footage was undeniable. He hadn't just used a shadow quirk. He had, for all intents and purposes, called a dead hero back from the grave to fight. That evening, the news was dominated by the incident at Kyoshi Ward. The footage was played on every channel, analyzed by quirk specialists who were utterly baffled. They showed the grainy photo of the real Krillin next to the crystal-clear HD footage of his silent, black counterpart. They were identical in form, but opposites in spirit. One was a beloved hero of the people, the other was a terrifying, silent specter of immense power, and at the center of it all was the Yui student, Izuku Midoriya. The media, in its relentless pursuit of a catchy headline, had found one. He wasn't the shadow hero or the summoner. They latched on to the most visceral, most shocking interpretation of his power. They called him the Necro Hero. In his dorm room at UA, Izuku watched the news report, the sound muted, the lurid shirin flashing at the bottom of the screen. Kyoshi Ward incident. UA student debuts shocking necromancy quirk. He had saved the day. He had done what a hero was supposed to do. He had protected the innocent. But as he looked at the fear in the eyes of the people on the screen, as he felt the cold, satisfied hum of the ring on his finger, he knew he hadn't become a symbol of hope. He had become an object of fear. He was hailed not as a miracle worker, but as a ghoul. The victory felt like a funeral. And as he stared at his reflection in the dark screen of the television, he saw the face of a boy who had gotten his wish. He was a hero. But he was terrified of the price. The title of Necro Hero stuck to Izuku like a layer of grave dirt. It spread through the school with the speed of a viral meme, whispered in the hallways, muttered in the cafeteria, and plastered all over the student forums. The Kyoshi Ward incident had transformed him overnight. He was no longer just the timid, mumbling boy who broke his bones. He was now a figure of morbid fascination and quiet dread. His classmates in 1A treated him with a new, unsettling mixture of awe and apprehension. Uraraka still tried to be her bubbly self, but her smiles were strained, her questions about his new quirk carefully worded to avoid sounding accusatory. Ida, ever the class representative, treated him with a formal, almost clinical respect, as if Izuku were a piece of dangerous, uncalibrated equipment that required careful handling. Todoroki, ever watchful, simply observed him with his usual quiet intensity, though Izuku could feel a new layer of analytical curiosity in his mismatched gaze. They were all walking on eggshells around him. He had saved people, defeated a powerful villain, and done something no one had ever seen before. He should have been celebrated. Instead, he was being handled like a bomb. And then there was Bakugo. 4 days after the incident, Katsuki Bakugo had been unnervingly silent. He hadn't exploded. He hadn't screamed Deku. He hadn't thrown any insults or started any fights. He had simply watched Izuku with a quiet, simmering intensity that was far more terrifying than his usual explosive rage. His crimson eyes would follow Izuku across the classroom, during lunch, in the hallways. It wasn't the look of a rival sizing up the competition. It was the look of a man trying to comprehend an aberration, something that had broken the fundamental laws of his understanding of the world. Izuku knew it was the calm before a storm of unimaginable proportions. The storm finally broke during a heroics class combat exercise. The setting was ground beta, the sprawling urban cityscape. The task was a 2-on-2 battle, a standard training scenario. By a twist of fate that felt more like a deliberate act of a cruel god, the pairings were announced: Izuku Midoriya and Achiko Uraraka vs. Katsuki Bakugo and Shoto Todoroki. The moment the teams were announced, a thick, palpable tension descended upon the observation room where the rest of the class was gathered. All Might, who was overseeing the exercise from the main monitor bank, stiffened, his already gaunt frame seeming to shrink even further. As they walked towards their designated starting point, Uraraka tried to break the silence. "So, Deku-kun, your new quirk is amazing. A little spooky, but amazing. Do you think you can summon someone to help us against Todoroki's eyes?" The question, though innocently meant, felt like a physical blow. I don't know," Izuku mumbled, his hand instinctively tightening over the fingerless glove on his right hand. It's not that simple. It takes a lot out of me. I don't think I can control it that well." The lie was flimsy, and he knew it. The truth was, he was terrified to even try. He couldn't risk it. Not here. Not against his classmates. What if he lost control? What if he summoned something that hurt them? What if the ring decided to show him another vision in the middle of the fight? He had resolved to rely only on one for all, no matter how corrupted or sluggish it felt. He had to prove to himself, and to All Might, that he didn't need the dark power. The exercise began. Izuku and Uraraka were the heroes, tasked with securing a weapon hidden in a 5-story office building. Bakugo and Todoroki were the villains, guarding it. Their plan was simple. Uraraka would use her zero-gravity to create diversions and navigate the building stealthily, while Izuku would engage their opponents directly. It was a flawed plan from the start. Todoroki struck first. A massive wave of ice erupted from the building's entrance, flooding the entire street and encasing the lower floors in a glacier. It was a show of overwhelming power designed to immobilize them and dictate the terms of the engagement. "We have to go around," Izuku shouted, activating One for All. The familiar sickness immediately began. Green lightning, now tainted with wisps of black smoke, sputtered around him. The power felt thick and wrong, but he pushed through it. He grabbed Uraraka and leaped, his corrupted 5% carrying them to the roof of an adjacent building. From there, they could see Bakugo, perched like a gargoyle on the edge of their target building's roof, a feral grin on his face. He wasn't waiting. He was hunting. "DKU!" The roar was pure, undiluted Bakugo, a sound of explosive promise. He launched himself across the gap between buildings, his explosions propelling him like a human missile. "I'll handle him!" Izuku yelled to Uraraka. "Find Todoroki and the weapon!" Uraraka nodded, her face pale with determination, and made her way to a lower level to find another entry point. Izuku turned to face his lifelong rival. Bakugo landed on the roof with a resounding crash, his posture low and aggressive. His usual manic energy was there, but beneath it was something colder, something harder. "So," Bakugo growled, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. The air around his palms began to pop and crackle. "You've been busy, haven't you? Playing with dead people." The words hit Izuku like a spray of shrapnel. "Kaken, it's not like that. It's my quirk. Don't you dare call that pathetic bullshit a quirk." Bakugo exploded, his voice rising to its familiar furious pitch. But the anger was different this time. It wasn't born of arrogance, or a desire to be the best. It was born of a deep, profound, and absolute revulsion. Quirks are about what you can do. Your strength. Your sweat. Your power. You're not doing anything. You're just pulling the strings on some dead hero's corpse like a goddamn puppet master. It's disgusting. This was the core of it. For Bakugo, strength was earned. It was personal. It was the culmination of one's own effort and will. Izuku's new power was, in his eyes, the ultimate cheat. It was a borrowed, macabre strength that desecrated the very concept of heroism he held so dear. He wasn't jealous of the power. He was horrified by its nature. "It's not like that," Izuku protested, taking a defensive stance. "I saved people. You think that makes it okay?" Bakugo roared, blasting forward. "You think using some dead guy's ghost to do your dirty work makes you a hero? It makes you a coward!" The fight began. It was brutal and one-sided. Izuku, struggling with his tainted One for All, was sluggish. His movements were a fraction of a second too slow, his reactions dulled by the internal battle against the ring's influence. Bakugo, on the other hand, was a whirlwind of precision and fury. He was faster, more aggressive, and more focused than Izuku had ever seen him. He wasn't just trying to win. He was trying to dismantle him. An explosion sent Izuku skidding back, his arms stinging. He tried to counter with a kick, but Bakugo was already in the air, spinning for another attack. All that power you got from All Might, Bakugo snarled, punctuating his words with concussive blasts that forced Izuku onto the defensive. And you still gotta resort to playing with corpses. Does it make you feel strong, Deku? Hiding behind someone else's legacy because you're too damn weak to build your own. Every word was a psychological blow, aimed with surgical precision at the heart of Izuku's own deepest fears. And the ring on his finger was listening. It was feasting. Izuku's frustration, his shame, his rising anger at Bakugo's accusations, it was all fuel. He could feel the cold power welling up inside him, a dark and tempting tide. He mocks you, the whisper slithered into his mind clearer now, fed by the high-octane emotions of the battle. He sees your power as a weakness. He sees you as a fraud. He is not afraid of you. He is disgusted by you. Remind him what fear feels like. No, Izuku grunted, dodging another blast. He wouldn't. He wouldn't use it. Bakugo propelled himself high into the air, preparing for his signature move. AP shot, autocannon, a rapid-fire barrage of focused, armor-piercing explosions shot towards Izuku. He tried to dodge, but he was cornered. His corrupted one for all sputtered. He wouldn't be fast enough. He will not stop, the ring whispered, its voice now laced with a cold, logical urgency. He intends to harm you. To break you. The living are liabilities. Unpredictable. Emotional. But you can use that. His anger is a weapon. His pride is a weakness. Show him a flicker of true power. Not to defeat him. Just to remind him. The first AP shot grazed his shoulder, tearing his costume and searing his skin. The pain was sharp and real. His resolve fractured. He didn't want to hurt Kaken. But he didn't want to be broken either. He just needed to stop him. To create an opening. Fine, he thought, the surrender a single, desperate pulse of will. He didn't try to summon a person. That was too far. He just needed a distraction. The ring suggested a target, pulling a memory not from Izuku, but from the ambient emotional field. A memory that belonged to Bakugo. The sludge villain incident. The feeling of drowning, of suffocating, the terror of being helpless, his own quirk useless against the suffocating mass. Izuku's right hand, the one with the ring, shot out. A stream of black, viscous energy, like thick ink, poured from his palm. It didn't form a hero. It formed a vague, shifting shape on the ground in front of him. A semi-liquid mass of shadow with two huge, leering eyes and a monstrous, grinning mouth. It was a caricature of the sludge villain, a nightmare drawn from Bakugo's own subconscious trauma. It wasn't a full construct. It was just a flicker. A psychic jab. But it was enough. As Bakugo descended, his eyes, alight with the fire of battle, fell upon the shadowy form. For a fraction of a second, his brain registered the shape. The leering eyes. The suffocating mass. His battle focus shattered. The memory, the visceral terror of that day, slammed into him with the force of a physical blow. The feeling of suffocating mud filling his lungs, the mocking laughter, the humiliation of needing to be saved by the very person he despised. His anger, his pride, all the emotions that fueled his fighting style, were instantly replaced by a jolt of pure, primal fear. His explosions faltered. His trajectory wobbled. That single moment of hesitation was all the opening Izuku needed. But it wasn't Izuku who took the opening. The shadowy sludge construct on the ground, which should have been a simple, inert distraction, suddenly surged with power. It fed on Bakugo's spike of raw terror, the ring acting as a conduit. The vague shape became sharper, more defined. A shadowy tendril, impossibly fast, lashed out from the construct. It wasn't aiming for Bakugo. It was aiming for his leg. The tendril wrapped around Bakugo's ankle in midair. It didn't restrain him. It pulled. With a sickening, unnatural yanking force, it yanked Bakugo out of the air. His trajectory completely ruined, he was slammed, hard, into the concrete edge of the rooftop. The impact was brutal. A sickening crack echoed across the roof as his head connected with the solid corner of a ventilation unit. His body went limp, and he crumpled to the ground unconscious. Silence. Izuku stared, his mind refusing to process what had just happened. He hadn't meant for that. He had just wanted to distract him. He hadn't told the construct to attack. The ring had done it on its own. It had taken his simple intention and escalated it, using Bakugo's own fear as the weapon to strike him down. The shadowy construct, its purpose served, dissolved into a wisp of black smoke and vanished. Uraraka's horrified gasp came through his earpiece. Deku-kun! What was that? Is he okay? Izuku couldn't answer. He was looking at his right hand. The ring was pulsing with a faint, deep purple light, a color he hadn't seen before. It felt sated. It felt like a predator that had just enjoyed a particularly rich meal. The spike of Bakugo's fear had been a delicacy, and the surge of power Izuku felt from it, a cold satisfaction that bloomed in his chest, made him feel physically ill. He stumbled over to Bakugo's unconscious form. A trickle of blood was seeping into his spiky blonde hair from a gash on his temple. He was breathing, but he was completely out. The Hero Team wins, All Might's voice announced over the intercom, but it was flat, devoid of any energy. It sounded like the voice of a man announcing a funeral. In the observation room, the other students were silent, their faces a mixture of shock and horror. They had just watched Izuku Midoriya conjure a monster from shadow, and use it to brutally dispatch their most powerful classmate. They hadn't seen the psychological aspect. They had just seen the result. When Bakugo woke up, it was to the sterile white ceiling of the infirmary. His head throbbed with a dull, booming ache, and the world had a blurry, unfocused edge. Recovery Girl was there, tuteing over him. A concussion and a nasty gash, she said. You're lucky it wasn't a skull fracture, young man. You need to be more careful. Bakugo didn't answer. He sat up, pushing her helping hands away. He wasn't focused on the pain. He was replaying the last moment before he blacked out. The shadowy shape. The feeling of suffocating. The unnatural pull on his leg. He looked around the room. He was alone, except for Recovery Girl. Where is he? Bakugo growled, his voice hoarse. Midoriya is fine, Recovery Girl said, misunderstanding. He and Uraraka are being debriefed by All Might. I don't give a damn if he's fine, Bakugo snarled, swinging his legs over the side of the bed. Where is he? He stood up, swaying slightly, and stormed out of the infirmary, ignoring Recovery Girl's protests. He knew where Deku would be. He always went to the same place after a fight. The locker room. He slammed the door open. The room was empty except for one figure. Izuku was sitting on a bench, his head in his hands, still in his torn and scorched hero costume. He hadn't even started to change. He looked up as Bakugo entered, his face pale and stricken. Bakugo strode forward until he was standing over him. He wasn't shouting. He wasn't crackling with explosions. His voice was low, controlled, and dripping with a cold fury that was more terrifying than any scream. What the hell, he said, the words tight and clipped, was that thing? Kaken, I'm so sorry, Izuku stammered, looking up at him, his eyes wide with genuine remorse. I didn't mean to, it got out of control. I'm not asking for your pathetic apology, Bakugo hissed. I'm asking what it was. That sludge thing. I know what I saw. Izuku flinched. My power, it reacts to emotions. Strong emotions. It must have sensed it used my fear against me, Bakugo finished, his voice dangerously quiet. That's what it did, isn't it? It reached into my head, pulled out the worst day of my life, and used it to beat me. Izuku couldn't deny it. He just looked down, his silence a confession. Bakugo stared at him for a long, silent moment. The simmering rage on his face slowly morphed into something else. Something Izuku had never, ever seen there before. It was a look of utter, profound disgust, mixed with a sliver of something that looked chillingly like pity. You know, Bakugo said, his voice barely a whisper. All my life, I've hated you. Hated you for being a useless, quirkless pebble in my way. Hated you for daring to look down on me. Hated you for getting a power you didn't earn. He took a step back, as if Izuku was something contagious. But this... He gestured vaguely at Izuku. I don't hate this. This isn't even worth hating. This is just pathetic. He leaned in, his crimson eyes boring into Izuku's. You're not a hero, Deku. You're not even a villain. You're a parasite. A grave robber. You feed on other people's pain and hide behind the ghosts of people stronger than you. You didn't beat me today. My own worst memory beat me. And you just stood there and let it happen. He turned and walked towards the door, his movements stiff. He paused with his hand on the handle. Stay the hell away from me, he said, without looking back. I'm not afraid of you. Don't you ever think that. I'm disgusted by you. There's a difference. The door slammed shut, leaving Izuku alone in the echoing silence of the locker room. Bakugo's words were more brutal than any explosion. He hadn't been defeated by a rival. He had been dismissed as an abomination. Bakugo's anger had always been a twisted form of acknowledgement, a sign that he saw Izuku as a competitor. But this was different. This was revulsion. This was the end of their rivalry, not because one had surpassed the other, but because one had ceased to even be on the same plane of existence. Izuku looked down at his trembling right hand. He had won the exercise. He had defeated his rival, but in the process, he had become something monstrous in the eyes of the one person whose acknowledgement he had, on some level, always craved. For the first time in his life, Katsuki Bakugo wasn't angry at him. He was repulsed by him, and as Izuku sat there, a fresh wave of self-loathing washing over him, he felt the ring on his finger give a faint, contented pulse. It had fed well today. It had fed on victory, on fear, and on the delicious, exquisite despair of a broken rivalry.